Do you remember that Oregon plays Illinois in a conference game this year? That's a thing that's going to happen. Yeah, on the football field. Do they pose any threat?
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks, which is why, if you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch the show, which today is brought to you by our friends over at Ultimate College Football HC, a brand new mobile game that is completely free, has no ads, and 100% playable offline. Use promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Begin your coaching legacy today. Lots to get to, hot takes galore from some of you out there in the Oregon fan community that I'll address later on today's show, and 24/7 Sports once again confirming that Oregon has a chance to win the national championship this year. But first, that is Sunny Verma, Locked On Illinois. That's our Big Ten brethren, Illinois, for all of you Oregon fans out there who may have forgotten. I imagine most of you didn't, but a gentle reminder can't hurt. Let's get right to the point of it, Sunny. I look at Illinois' offseason. We've talked about them on Locked On College Football before, and they're going to show up to Autzen Stadium, and I feel like this should be a game that Oregon just kind of rolls through.
And I'm not going to sit here and disagree. This is a Brett Bielema team. For the most part, it's a team that's going to be running the ball a lot. It's a team that's got rebuilt its offensive line, essentially, but it's a team right now that has not recovered from losing those three guys to the NFL 2 seasons ago on that defensive side of the football. Oregon can come in, well, I guess it's at home. Oregon can score 50 easy. And while Illinois is going to have one of the better offenses in the Big Ten, they're not going to be able to keep up with Oregon.
Yeah, they have a mobile quarterback in Luke Altmaier that can pose problems for defenses. We've seen even great Nick Saban teams struggle with mobile quarterbacks through the years, but Altmaier has had his ups and downs, and he's an interesting guy to watch in the Big Ten this year. He doesn't scare me, though. What is the attribute that he brings to the Illinois offense that gives you any amount of encouragement at all about what they can do this year?
Well, he did get considerably better as the year progressed. A lot of people, especially in the national side, recall Altmaier and him throwing those 4 interceptions in the first half of that Penn State game that I believe was on national TV. But in his final 6 starts, he had 10 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. Essentially, once Illinois figured out their offensive line situation and we had the emergence of a running back in Caden Fagan, Luke Altmaier all of a sudden turned into an above-average quarterback. So the hope for the Illinois this upcoming season is that Luke is able to make a somewhat of a jump in his second full season as starter.
When you look at this Illinois roster and compare it to the Oregon roster, where do you think the biggest discrepancy is? And you may not know the Oregon roster by heart, but 24/7 Sports has got it as one of the 10 best in all of college football, and I think that's because the offensive line is great, the defensive line should be great, linebackers are really good, receivers might be the best in the country. Where do you think Oregon has the biggest gap going into this matchup?
I'll just go ahead and assume it's the defensive line, just because Illinois' defensive line room is probably the worst room in that locker room. When you lose a guy like Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph in one offseason, you're counting on guys like Briggs, who's a transfer in from Florida State, who kind of has a history of injury in his career. It's probably the worst case scenario for Illinois to lose a guy like Briggs because there's really not much depth in him. That's probably the room that's got the lowest floor and lowest ceiling.
If Illinois were to make this game uncomfortable for Oregon fans for any amount of time, and certainly Duck fans are no strangers to playing down to the level of competition. Now, that hasn't happened much in the Dan Lanning era. It really hasn't happened at all in the Dan Lanning era, at least not for a 4-quarter stretch. But what gives you, if any, optimism about this Illinois team that makes you think, hey, if everything goes right, Illinois could go into Autzen Stadium and you look up after a quarter and a half and go, wait a minute, Oregon hasn't pulled away from Illinois yet. What's going on? How would that look?
I think if Illinois jumps out to an early lead, whether it's like a pick 6 or something along those lines, I really think that Caden Fagan's going to be one of the stars of this upcoming college football season. When during Big Ten Media Days, Spencer, when I hung out with you, I got to talk to Brett Bielema, and Brett Bielema talked about how Caden Fagan hit numbers that even NFL players that he put into the NFL, were not able to hit. And so he's really excited. He's as big of as a linebacker, and yet he's faster than any running back that he's ever had. And as you know, Brett Bielema has had a lot of running backs in his career. They've rebuilt the offensive line. The staff itself is very confident in the guys that they have up front. So this could be a typical Brett Bielema team. A lot of Illinois' victories are going to come from getting a lead and pounding the ball to Caden, running that clock, and not having the defense on the field. So if Illinois is to keep it somewhat competitive against Oregon, we get off to an early lead, and all of a sudden we just control the clock with Caden Fagan and then Luke Altmaier running play actions every now and then, and just slowly getting those first downs.
Oregon fans might remember the name Brett Bielema because he's been a head coach in college football for a very, very, very long time. The last time he went up against the Ducks was 2011, the Rose Bowl, with Darren Thomas and DeAnthony Thomas running wild. The Michael James had a big day. I think Kenyon Barner had a big touchdown as well. It was a big day for the offense, but that was a Russell Wilson-led Wisconsin team that also pushed Oregon to the very brink. How do you feel Brett Bielema is today as a coach compared to what he was back then?
Well, I mean, the floor on this Illinois team was in just really bad shape. What Lovie Smith ended up doing by the time he was done in Champaign was he didn't even recruit his home base of Illinois. We had literally zero of the top 20 recruits in Illinois the last 2 seasons that he was here. Now, Illinois is not a national program by any sort of stretch. So the only way a program like ours is going to be building to even respectability is to recruit in Big Ten country. You recruit the big guys, stay local, stay home. We didn't do that. Now, Lovie did a good job, getting hidden gems like Devin Witherspoon from Florida.
That's my guy with the Seahawks, Devin Witherspoon. We love him.
He's fantastic.
He's a stud.
But, Brett, this has been a long journey. The offensive line has gotten a lot bigger. The defensive line is getting bigger. The floor of this program is rising slowly and slowly. What he's still struggled with is, bringing in the high 4-star player. We're not even sniffing any 5-star players. So it's one of those where our average rating has gotten a little bit higher, but with the Big Ten expanding, a lot of these teams are just bringing in more talent than Illinois is. And Brett Bielema can count on his coaching. He's hired a pretty decent staff. But when you're running up against some dogs on the other side, you can only do so much.
Last thing for you, Sunny. Eventually, I haven't looked at every year-by-year Big Ten schedule. Oregon will go to Champaign and play Illinois. Any recommendations for Duck fans out there if they decide to go to that game? Travel tips, get into the stadium, places to eat, anything for when that matchup comes about.
It's really easy to get to the stadium, so that shouldn't be a problem, depending if you fly into Champaign or you make that 2-hour drive from Chicago. But once you get to Champaign, literally you park your car, and every block there's a different bar or slash club. They've actually redone the entire area over the last couple of years, and so it's been a long time since I went there. So again, they've kind of remodeled the whole block, but you'll be fine regardless where you decide to go.
Oregon fans, if you end up going to the Illinois game one day, go hang out with my guy Sunny. It is a good time. Sunny Verma, Locked On Illinis. Sunny, appreciate the time.
No problem, Spencer.
Couple of scorching hot takes from you guys out there in the Locked On Ducks community. I mean, although one of them's not as hot as you'd think. That is coming up next. Hey, Locked On Duck listeners. I want to take a moment to give you a heads up on a brand new mobile game that I think you're going to love, Ultimate College Football HC. In this amazing game and simulation, you get to step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your college football program to glory. Can you imagine actually being the Ducks head coach? Can you imagine having that in your pocket at any point in time? That's what Ultimate College Football HC lets you do. And here's what you'll really love about the game. You're responsible for calling the offensive plays. Your strategy will not only determine the success of your football season, but will shape the future and legacy of the program. PROGRUM. Proper pronunciation and spelling there. Ultimate College Football HC is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. And, of course, we have a special offer for our Locked On Ducks listeners. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Make sure to take advantage of this perk as it will get your team off to a strong start. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com, or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate College Football HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. Good old second segment sip. Does the trick every time. Couple of scorching hot takes. One not as hot as the other, but let's go for the hot take. Mailbag is always open. YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter, at @McLaughlinCFB or at Locked On Ducks. If you want priority access and a bunch of other perks, go become a Locked On Ducks insider. That link in the description below, wherever you listen to or watch this show. 8 days to Oregon football, by the way. This question, or this hot take, I mean surface of the sun hot, came from Darius. Hot take, you got it. Dylan Gabriel will have at least 5 games with 500 passing yards this year. Okay. It's one thing if you'd said 5 games with 400 yards. Like, that'd be a hot take, but a little bit more feasible. 5 games with 500 passing yards? What? Darius, my man. Let's have a talk, you and me. What sort of offense do you think Oregon is running here? Frankly, if Dylan Gabriel were going to go for 500 yards, which I believe would be a career high, I don't think he's done that before, because most quarterbacks haven't thrown for half 1,000 yards in a single game before. Illinois might be one where that could happen. They are not a great team. Now, they're not in the early part of a rebuild, for instance, but that could be a game. Idaho's a game where that could happen if Dylan Gabriel stays in long enough, which I don't anticipate happening, but 5 games with 500 yards passing, there are 2 reasons this can't happen. Number 1, it's incredibly hard to do. You have to have a 500-yard passing game, and to do that in half of Oregon's regular season games. You're not doing it in a postseason game. The teams you'll be playing will be far too good. 5 games, almost half. I don't even know which 5 those would be. Idaho would be one. Oregon State would probably be another. Boise State, I suppose, just because they're a Mountain West team, so those would be the games. And then Illinois, maybe Maryland when they come to town. But I mean, Ohio State, you're not doing that. Michigan, you're not doing that. Wisconsin on the road, you're not doing that. Washington, even though they have a lot of turnover, I don't think you're doing that there either. That might be the hottest take ever submitted on this show. I'm not even kidding. Not even kidding. That might be the hottest take yet. If you wanted me to rate that on the Josh Pate boldness scale, can I give that an 11 out of 10? That won't happen. I think a more interesting question, though, and realistic one, is how many games does Dylan Gabriel go over 300 yards this year? I'd certainly expect it. Would I expect it against Idaho? Oregon might be able to run all over the field against Idaho, and you've got a really talented lineup of running backs who you might want to get some carries to, like Jade Lamar and Jay Harris, get them some run. Does Dylan Gabriel go for 300 yards against Idaho? Probably. Because I imagine Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson will just run by a lot of the guys that are going to attempt to guard them, and they probably won't do so very successfully. But how many times would Dylan Gabriel be over 300 yards? That's a question I just made up for myself as kind of a spinoff of this surface of the sun scorching hot take from Darius. I'd probably go with 8. I think 8 is probably the number. I don't think he'll have a game under 200 yards, including Michigan and Ohio State. I think that's too low of a threshold. I don't think Bo Nix had a game under 200 yards. Bo Nix didn't have that many games under 300 yards passing in his Oregon career. I think Gabriel will probably have 8 or 9. The Ohio State-Michigan games, be tougher. Those are legit defenses. They got a lot of big-time players, Ohio State especially. I think Ohio State's got a more talented defense altogether. But, yeah, I think Gabriel's capable of going with this receiving core and the offensive line if fully healthy, and even if they have to figure out what the interior rotations are like, if Bedford is still battling an injury or if he comes back and gets re-injured, you still have 2 NFL tackles, and you still have a third-year experienced starter in Marcus Harper, who has been with Oregon for a long time, and he's going into his 3rd year as a starter. So there are at least 3 guys that I know for certain are studs. Bona fide studs, contributed to some of the lowest sack numbers, maybe the lowest sack numbers over a multi-year span I've ever seen for Oregon football. So How many games? Debate that in the comments section or shoot me a note. How many games, regular season only, just regular season? You'll see why I'm emphasizing that in just a moment. Just regular season, how many games does Dylan Gabriel go over 300 yards? Let me know. Here's another hot take. Nick says that Jordan James can get to 1,500 yards. Now, if you missed a conversation from earlier in the week, the take was that Jordan James gets to 1,300 yards, which on the surface I said, whoa, hot take. I don't think that can. And then I looked at it and went, well, actually, that's kind of feasible. If he's actually RB1, even if you have a solid complementary back in Noah Whittington, which I expect him to, guess what? Backs have come very close. Royce Freeman 2017 was the last guy to go over 1,300 yards, but guys have come close. Bucky Irving came close. Troy Dye, Travis Dye. See, almost slipped him up right there. Travis Dye, he came close as well in 2021. That was, aided partially by CJ Verdell going down, but still, it's possible. So 1,500 yards. So I saw that and went, man, that's asking a lot. You would really be committed to Jordan James as an RB1. And I don't think there's ever been a time really in the Oregon backfield where you've had a true number one workhorse. And what I mean by that is where you have a guy not who isn't capable of being a workhorse, but who isn't going to get the ball 30 to 35 times. Think like Jonathan Taylor, Melvin Gordon at Wisconsin over the years, or Blake Corum even Blake Corum had a great backup. That's what Oregon has always had, is they've had a number two guy. There was LaMichael, but then there was Kenyon. You never had to solely rely on LaMichael. You worked in a number two running back pretty consistently. I expect this backfield to be that as well. I think Jordan James will be the number one, but I don't think Whittington's that far behind him. I think there will be days where Oregon fans, like last year, where there were days when Oregon fans were clamoring for more Jordan James touches and fewer Bucky Irving touches. I think you could have that this year. Not because James isn't talented, because Noah Whittington's really good. And I don't want people to forget that. I'm a big Noah Whittington fan. But Nick had a follow-up comment that I caught before I came on to record the show. He said, just think about why I said that. Oregon is sitting with a decent chance at playing up to 16 games this year. Now, I had not considered that. Assuming they play 15, then James needs to average 100 yards a game. I don't think it's unreasonable to think he'll average 100 yards per game this year. Well, that's a good way of looking at it. How many games will Oregon play this year? It should, if all goes according to plan, at least 14. At least, bare minimum. To have a successful season, Oregon's got to play 14 games. That would imply that you have either played in the Big Ten championship and gotten into the playoff, or missed the Big Ten championship but won a first-round playoff game. Either one of those things. If Oregon plays 14 games, as they did last year, that is a real possibility. If James can get to 1,500 yards, 100 yards a game, yeah, I think it's reasonable. Especially, we were talking about Illinois earlier in today's show. Don't expect a lot of resistance there. And there are a number of games like that. Maryland, don't know that they're going to be great. Purdue could be okay. Like Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, probably in that order, they're going to be tough to run the football on. But Washington should be able to run the football. First 3 games of the year, Oregon should be able to run the football a lot. I'm interested to see if Jordan James has a 200-yard game in any of the first 3 contests this year. I think he's more than capable. I think this Oregon offensive line, even without Matthew Bedford in there, still has a much, much bigger advantage, or just has a significant advantage, is a better way to put that, than every defensive line they're going to go up against. I think Boise State or Oregon State clearly offers more resistance than Idaho, but this is a big gap. This is one of the 10 best offensive lines in all of college football, and Jordan James could absolutely go off. And could he average 100 yards a game by the end of the year? Yeah, I could see it. I could see it. You get that offensive line healthy, you get him cooking, I could see that happening. So that take on the surface, hot take. But if you think about it with the postseason factor, not as hot as it seems. Still more to get to on today's show. 24/7 Sports has confirmed what we probably knew, but now you can really, really feel good about the fact that Oregon can win a national championship because they've got the roster to prove it. That's coming up next. First, this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. How about that? Game Time Picks filters out the fluff, so they only show you incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of seats. They've got all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You just turn it on, and then you don't have to get whacked with an extra amount of money that you have to pay at the very end. Plus, you get a panoramic view of your seat before you arrive. They've got their lowest price guarantee. Game Time is just the spot to go. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. That's LOCKEDONCollege, all one word. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So historically, you have to be in the top 10 of 24/7 Sports team composite rankings to win a national championship. Well, good news. Oregon is number 6. Bama is first. Georgia is second. Ohio State third. Texas fourth. Clemson fifth. I'll get to that in just a moment. But Michigan was an outlier a year ago in recent history in that their team composite was inside the top 15 but outside the top 10, and they won the national championship. That's just how well coached they were. Jim Harbaugh was very, very good, it turns out, and college football ran him away, but I'll stop. Anyway, lot to unpack there. Clemson being ahead of Oregon, I do not agree. Do not agree. Has Clemson recruited well in the last several cycles? Yes. I'm not sure how 24/7 came up with this particular metric for two reasons. Number one, Clemson does not use the transfer portal. If you don't want to factor that into your calculations, okay. Oregon has still had back-to-back top 10 recruiting classes coming into this year. And they had a top 20 class in the 2022 cycle as well. So I'm not really sure, like on paper, I'd imagine if you put Oregon on a neutral field with Clemson, which is a potential college football playoff matchup for what it's worth, I bet Oregon would be favored. I imagine Oregon would be favored. And I think Clemson is a fine team this year. I don't think they're good. I think Oregon has one of the 5 best rosters in all of college football. And you can debate about, where this team should go or that one. I have a hard time not putting Georgia number 1 with the way they've recruited over the last couple of years. I was surprised to see Alabama at number 1 just because they lost a lot from last year, but then they did a really good job in the transfer portal. Still, I didn't expect to see them at number 1 ahead of both Georgia and Ohio State. I think it should be Georgia 1. I think Ohio State 2. And then you can make the case that Oregon has a number 3 roster. You could put them at number 5, but I think they're in that sort of range. But Oregon being ahead of other teams that expect to compete for a national championship like LSU or Notre Dame or our old friend Mario Cristobal down at Miami, like this is just another piece of evidence for those everydayers out there that, yes, Oregon is in that sort of level. And if they don't win the national championship this year, it's not because they are overhyped. It's just because it would be because they just didn't go out and execute. Georgia didn't win the national championship last year. Were they overhyped? Were they overrated? Were they not actually good? No, they just didn't go execute. It came down to one game. It was a 4-team playoff. If it'd been a 12-team, maybe Georgia wins, but it wasn't, so they didn't. It came down to that one game. They were plenty good enough. They did not execute. That's how college football goes sometimes. That's the only reason, barring injuries, that Oregon wouldn't, go as far as they want to go this season. Every single metric. It's not a coincidence that a bunch of national outlets and pundits or whoever look at Oregon and say, yeah, that's a national title contender. Josh Pate says it. Joel Klatt says it. 24/7 Sports, ESPN, everyone says it. The hype is there, but it's well-deserved. It is absolutely, positively well-deserved. And the more I look at this Oregon roster, the fewer weaknesses that I see in it. Like, it's Oregon has first world problems in the college football world when you're talking about roster deficiencies. Are Oregon safeties great in coverage over the top? Are they going to be playmaking rovers like John Boyette or Verone McKinley or Brady Breeze? Maybe not. But is Oregon still going to have one of the 10 best offenses in college football? Yep. Are they going to have one of the 20 best defenses statistically, at least, in college football? Yep, they're going to have that too. Are the special teams good enough? Is the talent there? Is the depth there? I see it everywhere. I see it everywhere you look. So I'm glad that they're inside the top 10. And that historically is another good indicator that Oregon can win the national championship. So saw that, thought I would share before I close with a very fun mailbag question here. This one is incredibly well thought out and fun to do. This from Dylan. Mailbag. If you could have any person related to Oregon sports be the honorary captain for each home game, assuming they were available, as some are in the NFL, so take that out of equation, who would it be and why? Here's mine. I gave some insight on the not so obvious one. So he gave 7 team captains. Idaho, Kenyon Sadiq, because he's from Idaho. Boise State, LeGarrette Blount. Nice. Michigan State, Marcus Mariota, 2014. Ohio State, CJ Verdell. Some say he is still running. Illinois, mentioned on today's show. Phil Knight, because it's a Nike school matchup. This next piece of deep dive here from Dylan. This is chef's kiss. Maryland, Cole Irvin, Baltimore pitcher in the MLB and Duck alum. That's good. That's such a good pick. And Washington, Kenny Wheaton, for obvious reasons. P.S. I'd love to play 18 with you at Willamette Valley Country Club in Canby. I'm a member there. I'm not very good, but drinks and a round on me. Hey, if you want to offer me a round of golf and drinks, I will hang out with anybody or anybody that listens to this show. But if you have the first part in there, that sweetens the pot. So for the rest of the games, because I don't know that I could argue on any of those particular picks, you leave me with Oregon State, UCLA, Purdue, Michigan, and Wisconsin. For Oregon State, I'd go with Josh Huff. You think back to the catch, 2013, most iconic moment of Josh Huff's career. So I'd go with him for that. UCLA, this is an obscure one. I went back and forth, but I landed on DJ James, which he transferred to Auburn, so I don't even know if you consider him a Duck alum at this point. The other consideration I had was Rodney Hardrick, but Hardrick had the fake punt in a game that Oregon, if I remember correctly, went on to win comfortably against UCLA. If DJ James doesn't make that interception, Oregon might lose the game back in 2021. So that's where my mind went. Purdue, I'd go with Kenyon Barner because he had the game-winning touchdown on 3rd and long against Purdue back in 2009 when Oregon won because they got a stop on a 2-point conversion. And Oregon plays Purdue again this year on the road in West Lafayette. Michigan, I'd go with Dennis Dixon. Come on. Blowout of the big house, fake Statue of Liberty. Of course it would be Dennis Dixon. And Wisconsin, I'd pick it on a bye week so that he could show up, but Justin Herbert. Quarterback in the clear, man. Quarterback in the clear. That was a fun, well-constructed question. Dylan, I salute you for your creativity. If you want a question answered in the mailbag, let me know in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. You can also become a Locked On Ducks insider. Link in the description below wherever you listen to or watch this show. Thanks for making this your first listen. Go make Locked On College Football your second or view if you're watching on YouTube. I host over there, giving you the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. The season's here. College football starts tomorrow or today, depending on when you're listening to or watching this show. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day and a great weekend. And as always, go Ducks.